strong, so it would have been Leta Strong.
That is fantastic. Holy cow.
Happy to share it with your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And you should, by the way. You absolutely should. Well, thank you so much for being here, Leta. I really appreciate you. So you have a few things going on. I really love, so you have your podcast, which is the Share Your Hotness podcast.
Correct.
Okay. All right. We're going to talk about that because that's awesome. But you also offer programs. How would you define what you do? Is it a coach? Is it a trainer?
Speaker.
Speaker?
Speaker, okay. Author. Yeah.
Speaker, author. Okay. Yeah, because you got a lot of things going on and a lot of things that I wanted to talk about. Because when you put in your bio, like, I put out there, people, who wants to come talk, what are we going to talk about? And I try to pick like interesting guests and provocative guests where I can. And certainly this would be a great opportunity to open up all of those.
Yeah,
with what you've got going on. And I think a lot of it's important.
Anywhere you want to go, Dalton, I'm here.
Yeah. And because one of the things you talk about is how to talk about sex with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that's changed in our generation. Like my parents, that generation really never talked about it. Right.
Yeah. Nope, they didn't. And
they didn't. And
there are consequences to that.
And we're all suffering right now. But another thing you do, that's pretty cool. So I have a daughter, she's 5. I would consider myself a feminist because I like girl power and woman power, and I want my daughter to be strong and independent.
So you're a classic feminist.
Yes.
Because I feel like there has to be a division.
We should go into, okay. Yes.
Feminism has gotten to being man-hating, and yes, ladies,
yeah.
I am a woman who is married to a man who has a boy that I made myself. And so when we are demeaning men, how is that if it's out the feminine energy, how does that, we need both.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
And why we are discounting men as all bad or men are pigs. And I'm very uncomfortable with any kind of statement that other people.
Yeah.
They are all this way.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Classic feminism is about equal rights, equal pay, which we have achieved that. Mm-hmm. We have achieved it. And I can argue some statistics on this.
Okay.
But, I took several years off to be home with my children.
Yeah.
My husband did not. And statistically, most women, if they have any kind of financial ability to do so, will take some time off to have a child, a year, maybe even 5 years out of the workplace to be home with that child. And so when they come back into the workforce, that is a 5-year pay gap. Right? So people look at that and they say, okay, but when you start looking at the C-level suite, you are seeing women with sometimes even more advanced pay and hiring opportunities because we've gone into a form of feminism that is about suppressing men and especially white men. And I'm saying no.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot to unpack there, because you're right. I would say more classical feminist for sure. Because, I don't know what you call it, like woke feminism, but I'm definitely not any kind of hater because I just don't. It's not productive in that sense.
Well, like toxic masculinity, that is making a phrase that says all men are toxic.
Or like now, masculinity itself is toxic.
Right. And it's like,
it's weird.
I like that my husband can engulf me with his arms and hold me and everything feels safer because he's masculine, because he's more likely to go fight a battle, physically and would do better as he served in the military than if I tried to put on a 50-pound rucksack and haul a gun and haul my coworker, AK, another soldier, off of the battlefield. I really think that men are better suited for that.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, I could bench press 165 pounds when I was 15. I no longer could do that, but most of fellow soldiers are over 165 pounds, and that made me one of the toughest girls on the block.
100%.
So we're built differently. I also got to make babies. Boom.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I think that's cool. We miss, I think, if we're going to talk about this, but, and of course, like, obviously I'll let you introduce yourself, but we're already in the weeds. So, Leta, we're going. So this is
Yeah,
where
we're
this
just
is
here
where
to
it is.
have a good time and provide
But
value and maybe a little
yeah,
controversy, right?
yeah, I think so. And but you know what? It's interesting because I have always viewed that we've kind of lost this idea that it's okay to play different positions. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mhm,
Like, it's
mhm,
you know what I mean? And I don't know, maybe it's just because 'cause I'm a dude and we talk about sports, but you could really put it in any scenario, if you like dance or
right,
orchestra, right? Like, if you're on a team, everybody's gotta stay in their lane and do what they're supposed to do, and one position's not any better than the other, or
exactly.
instrument or part or whatever you wanna call it. And I think we've lost that in like traditional relationships, and maybe not like as a whole we've lost it, but there's definitely some pieces missing,
And
right?
we're playing to the exceptions instead of the
Oh,
generalization. Do you
yeah.
see what I'm
Yep,
saying? That
yep, yep.
there
I like
are
that.
women
Yeah.
out there who are turned off by the excitement I have of being able to make children, that are
Yeah.
like, "I don't wanna have babies." Well, you know what? When I was 20, I wasn't really sure if I did either. It took a little bit of maturing before I was ready to make that sacrifice, but I do believe that whenever we make sacrifices in relationships that are healthy, it's putting us in a better position to be enhanced in that relationship. And so,
Yeah.
for example, when my husband and I, before we had kids, we did a pretty even mix of who cooked dinner.
Oh,
But
yeah.
during those years that I was, at home with our kids, I was able to be at home with our children because he was out there making money. So that wasn't something I was owed, which I
Mhm.
think is kind of the 1950s model, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's something that as a team, we worked that out. And there was an article I saw a few years ago that I really liked that they said the average housewife, and you could be the average house person, right,
Mhm. Mhm.
is worth $140,000 a year to the main breadwinner. Because if you think about who's picking up the laundry and the dry cleaning and doing the cooking and the cleaning and all that kind of to hire all that in,
Mhm.
if you get off work at 6, 7 o'clock, when a lot of people do working traditional jobs, or 5 if they're lucky, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of places are closed. So you'd have to take time off of work to go do all those things. And of course, how epic to walk in the door and have dinner made. I love that when I come in the door and my husband has made one of his signature meals, right? Totally
Right.
makes me feel loved. But we have a teamwork that works for us that depending on who's busier at the time, the other one, we don't have to say, okay, it's on you. You're doing this. As a team, we pick up the slack for each other. And
Yeah,
over
yeah.
the years, it's been mostly me that's done most of the domestic stuff. But here's the thing, he doesn't care about decorating as much as I do.
Well, yeah. I mean,
So
that's part of it, right? Yeah.
yeah, and I know plenty of couples that the man is, more of the stay-at-home spouse, and I don't think
Mhm.
it matters if but being able to be at
Sure.
home or to be not in the workforce doesn't mean you're not working or owed that. It
Yeah.
means you're getting to do a different role. And traditionally, women have the multitasking brains and the care about aesthetics and the ability to nurture more typically than men do.
Mm. Sure.
And those
Yeah.
are really
Yeah.
awesome skill sets that we have often undervalued in our society, telling women in order to have power, you have to be like a man. Well,
Mm.
that means you're in an unhealthy dynamic. I'm not in that
Yeah.
dynamic. I have a wonderful husband who prizes what I do, if I'm making money or not, which lets me make more money, which helps me become more successful because I'm not in a power struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on a lot of good topics right there because one of the things that I always get like I think people get confused, maybe they get, backwards is this idea that yeah, like we can't do more than one thing, like it's an either or. I really love what you said at the beginning when you talked about how we're arguing the exceptions and maybe not the rules, right?
Mhm.
Because yeah, I don't know what you want to call it. Like, is the devil's in the details, or whatever? But when you focus on those tiny outliers, right? Yeah, I mean things can get pretty messy if you're focusing on the outliers, right?
Right. But in
And so yeah,
general, there are many women who love to have babies. They
yeah,
love that.
yeah, Yeah.
And, in the Bible, the only thing that ever made a woman curse God was the inability to have a child. It's pretty ingrained into, if you look at history, if you look at the Bible
Mhm.
as just a historical document. I don't. I
Okay.
believe in God, and I believe
Sure.
that to be the word of God. But if you looked at it just as a historical document, there's a lot of things that men got distracted by, but women only got distracted by that. So taking that away from us as though that is not something that is special, I actually see as demeaning to women.
I would
Saying that
agree.
the value
Yeah, I
of
would
being able
agree.
to have a child is not a huge contribution to society, that is where I feel like feminism went wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Or like yeah, or I have a really good friend of mine. Her name is Marin. She runs a podcast, the Mamahood podcast. And we were on her yeah, I mean that's an incredible show. Kudos to her.
Sounds awesome.
Um
Yeah, I think
yeah, she
motherhood and
yeah,
fatherhood should be
yeah, yeah.
celebrated.
Right. And well, and one of the aspects, we were over there for New Year's Eve, and we were talking about this dynamic of, masculinity and femininity, right? These archetypical kind of spectrums that everybody has to play in. Like as a man, I have to play, to my feminine side, to my feminine strengths, and to
Mhm,
my masculine strengths, because I think that one of the things that I think we've with that talk back to this toxic masculinity, and to this point that I was making when I was talking to my friend Marin, was like, if you are a mom, like this I don't know, woke feminism, that's what I'm going to call it.
mhm.
um is that, yeah, if you like are a stay-at-home mom, that means you're like submitting to like this patriarchy, right? Or whatever, and I'm like, that's crazy. And then on the
Submitting
flip side,
meaning getting to do one thing really well and
or that
specializing.
or that you love, right? And I
Yeah,
think that,
and
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, I think it's really funny that being a stay-at-home mom is somehow submitting to the patriarchy when the only way you could afford to do that is if you're independently wealthy or there's somebody who's making money for you to do that.
Yeah, doing something. Yeah,
So, sounds a
yeah, I
little
don't
bit entitled
right.
to say that a woman, is owed.
Yeah.
I mean, we just need to respect different roles, and that will
Yeah,
play
yeah, I
to the
think so.
outliers. Oh, so if I meet a guy who's staying home with the kids, good for him. I bet he's
Yeah,
doing a
do
great
what you
job
do
at it,
whatever you
instead of being
yeah,
like,
whatever.
"Only women can do that," right?
Yeah, yeah, and
Um,
that's the classical feminism, is like, that's what do whatever you like, it's your house, man.
right,
Run it
yeah,
how you gotta
and
run
if
it.
it
Run it
works
to how
for
to make
you
it
and your
work.
spouse,
Yeah,
and you're not neglecting the children, more power to you. But
right.
people have said to me often, like, did you have less kids so you could put more into your career? Or, it's good you
That's
didn't
great.
have as many kids so you could have a
Oh
powerful
my
career,
god.
or,
That's
things
crazy,
like this,
right?
assuming that children hold you back.
Yeah.
Oh, I could
What a
um, hands to
write another
heaven, I
book.
could do hours on how my children are my why
Yeah,
to
yeah,
show up every day awesome,
yeah.
every
I
single
I
day.
It's banana. I don't know. We'll talk about a lot of traumatic experiences for a child. Like, if and I don't know why people say that. Like, you're just setting. I mean, that's just a crazy. Like, if a kid hears that, and you do confidence workshops
Mhm.
for young
Yeah.
women.
And
And
that
I'm
goes into celebrating mother, 'cause so some moms like, "I lost myself in motherhood." No, don't blame yourself because you didn't figure out who you were before you made people, okay?
That's
Right?
fair.
You need to figure
Yeah.
you out, and so that's why I'm not a fan of having babies, at 17 and 19 and 20, and the brain doesn't finish forming, they say till it used to be 22, now it's 24.
20.
So,
Yeah. 24,
I'm not
25.
saying 30, I'm saying, probably not before your brain's finished forming, right? And you've had some
Yeah.
life
Sure.
experiences, because though you can be an amazing parent, and there are, I think it makes it harder to
Sure.
make that level of sacrifice that is required to be an engaged parent. But there is this thing that's being put out to women, and women will sometimes fall trap to this, and your kids listening to it, that you're not enjoying this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That
I've
and
had
that's hard for
days that I
kids.
don't love,
Sure.
absolutely,
Sure.
but my kids know. that they are loved to a disgusting amount of degree. And I think that is one of the greatest gifts we can give our children, if you made to make them or not, that you have bucked up and loved them and been the adult and given them that love, because life is hard.
Yeah.
And so they're going to need that resilience that comes from that foundation of knowing they always have that fallback.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like this idea of doing what's right for your situation and for your family. But yeah, I mean, like, how traumatic it would be to hear, you know, a mother talk about how her kids set them back. I mean, you're
You see
that's
it a lot.
crazy.
You see
Yeah,
it
I
a
know, I
lot.
know. And most of the time what makes me kind of frustrated, it's like unintentional. Like they're not they don't, usually like they're like, it's not malicious. There's no
Right.
malicious intent, right?
My mother said when I was younger, she said, I think I could have been a good mother to 2 kids. And I was like, my sister, my brother, me, my other brother. And so I spent a lot of time in my childhood trying to prove that I was valuable and that
Mm,
I was worth having. And I
yeah,
felt like I wasn't wanted. When I got older, I realized what my mom was saying. She felt overwhelmed. And it's
sure.
probably true that my mother probably didn't,
Yeah,
probably shouldn't have maybe had 5 kids with all of her life circumstances. That's for her to answer, and
sure.
I'm definitely glad she gave me life. But that statement taken out of context as a young child, because I didn't have the frame of reference to understand that,
Mhm.
was really something I had to work really hard to overcome, and that I don't
Yeah.
have to be productive to be loved.
Yeah, yeah.
But when a
And
child hears the message that they were not wanted, then they're like, "How do I keep earning my space?"
right. Yeah, which is a tough, you know, hand to play. You
Well,
know what I mean?
we all get a hand, and most of
Yeah,
us have not
yeah.
had the easiest hand.
No, and yeah, I like that you brought that up too, because that's one of my, I don't know, that's when my life changed, is when I realized that everybody has their own bag of crap that they're carrying around. You know what I mean? And like,
Right.
but absolutely. I think that yeah, I couldn't agree more. We were just having, it's so funny that we run into this, because I was just literally having this conversation before, during New Year's and things like that, because it's frustrating. And I'm having a conversation with one of my really good friends, uh, because, so let me tell you a story. I wanted to start a second podcast. So I, my friend Marin, I met through my wife. Her husband Dallin were really good friends. Done some business together, and I was like, "Hey, I want to do a fatherhood podcast. Like, I want to do one. I think that'd be cool." And I'm doing, I'm an entrepreneur, and sales guy at heart. So I do a little bit of market research. I go ask a couple friends, and I go, "Hey, I want to start this podcast where we like champion fathers, and we champion, and we try to help men like find their, manhood, essentially, because
Mhm.
I feel like that has been, like, when I go out with my friends, I feel like some of that's lost, because we're trying to play to these sides that are fine to play in. Like I said, like, I'm a feminist, and I got feedback, and I was like, they're like, "Yeah, I don't know if you should do that. I don't know if it's a good idea. You might get blown up for that. It might not be politically correct, or you could get." I had somebody tell me it could get dicey real quick, and I was like, "All right." So I didn't do it. It may happen in the future. I don't know, but I was like, just the feedback. And by the way, I'm going to tell you, these were all guys
Mhm.
who were telling me this. I'm like, "Hey, would it be cool to have a podcast where you could go and like be okay?" You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah,
learn more about.
I can hear the
Yeah,
voices that are
it
like,
was crazy. I was like,
and
"Oh my
that's
god."
why I'm pretty vocal about saying, "Look," 'cause I'm in a position where I've worked from home my children's whole entire lifetime, and I've
Yeah,
also been a very high income earner, so I have that credibility, you know,
sure. Yeah.
and successful in my chosen field, and I'm also married to a successful man. So it's not like I've been suppressed and haven't been able to have my life, and it drives me
Yeah,
nuts
yeah.
because I have a son that has been told he needs to apologize for being male.
Yeah, yeah, that's a tough one, because that's
And
real,
my
right? Yeah.
son is, I think an amazing male of tenderness and caring and protectiveness, which is what, the
Yeah.
masculine energy is of this protectiveness. He's fantastic. And the girl that ends up with him is going to be as lucky as I am with who I ended up with.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
why are we demeaning? Because when, Martin Luther King said, if there's an injustice, I'm going to slaughter the quote, but he basically said, if there's injustice among any of us, there's injustice for all.
Mm,
So when we as women take power, that's called dominion, where we need to figure out how to work as a society together. That is how you create cooperative systems that work for everyone. But if,
mhm.
you're telling people they're not allowed to speak or to feel certain things, instead of introducing new ideas and new ways of being, then you're just being an authoritarian.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So now let's talk about this, because you run one of the programs you run is a workshop for young women what did you call it, a maturation program for young women?
So I do maturation programs like, in the elementary school where they
Okay,
have to have
yeah.
a maturation speaker. I do those. I go in and talk
Oh,
about
I didn't know they
vaginas
had to
and
have.
periods, and yeah, and I'm
Wow.
wildly entertaining. So those are for fifth grade girls. And I did that
Okay.
basically, long story short, my daughter was like, this is so boring. And then a friend asked me to do it. And I was like, just to impress my daughter, again, another example of
Yeah.
why my kids are a why. I'm like, I'm going to do this. And then I loved it because I was able
That's
to
funny.
throw in, there's a state curriculum. We can't talk about, abstinence as a form of, so I just kind of make the comparison of
Well,
your
oh,
instrument's not ready to play yet.
so the state says you can't talk about abstinence as a form of
No.
like safe
Um,
sex or protection or something, or what?
there are a lot of things that can happen to a girl by having sexuality happen too young.
Yeah.
And going deep, I know
Go
you did
ahead.
your
Yeah.
homework, but
Yeah.
I wrote a book on overcoming sexual abuse, and so I'm very passionate about making sure that young girls, which we are sexualizing our children too much, bringing these conversations into kinder before a kid is 8, they have not decided what the value is between a boy and a girl. They just are just figuring out that there are differences between boys and girls,
Yeah.
but they've
Okay.
not put a value on it. So we used to be guilty of girls aren't as good as math, which is ridiculous, right?
Yeah, that's
And so there was
stupid.
this pushback in this, feminism, which is good, that of
Mhm.
course a girl can be good at engineering. Why couldn't she be good at engineering? And of course,
Of course, yeah.
guys can be good at color and design too, right?
And art and whatever, yeah, whatever you want.
Right. Whatever it is, we all
Mhm.
have different strengths. And so putting people, you can only do this if you're a boy or girl, is what I say is good for feminism. We break out of that.
Yeah.
But once we've gotten into, shaming people for historically being good at something, then we're stepping on really dangerous ground.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
but I'm very against bringing sexuality conversations of any kind into younger ages. And so I do agree that
Okay.
with the state saying you can't talk about abstinence, but you also shouldn't be talking about how to have sex. And so different states have
Okay.
different curriculums on that. Fortunately, in
Mhm.
the state that I'm in, it's just we just don't get into it. But I do think it's important that we get to throw a little bit of sexual safety, like your body, my choice,
Sure.
kind of things. Don't
Yeah.
touch me if it feels bad. You can say no. Teaching
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
teaching girls
Yeah,
to do that.
boundaries. Yeah, yeah.
I'm
Oh,
able
for
to
yeah, for
throw
sure.
some of that in, which is early confidence, early autonomy is very important. And
Of course.
at
Of
one
course.
point I've fallen onto the ground, I just make
Mhm.
it really fun. And then I do confidence workshops for girls and women, throwing in with image and how you present yourself, the total package, but all starting from here, not a place of I have to look good enough to be accepted.
Sure. Yeah, I like that. So let me go back just a second, because one of the things that you wrote and that I would like to talk about is how to have the conversation of sex with your kids.
Mhm.
Now you're saying that the lower there is an age where you really start to talk about it, and anything younger than that, I think you said 8, is like, so what do you do before 8? You just
Body autonomy. So when they're
okay,
2,
okay.
2.5 years old and you're in the tub and you're teaching them how to bathe themselves because you're tired of
Sure.
leaning over the tub, right?
Sure,
You're
yeah.
showing them, okay, this is how you clean your arm.
Yeah,
Oh my heavens, you're so good at that. Well
yeah.
done. Good job. At dinner time, little Joey is in charge of cleaning his arm. He did such a good job. And then when you get to, vagina or penis, you're not like, okay, now we've gotten to the sensitive areas. We're not getting all weird about it, right? We're just like, okay, this is how you clean it because there's different ways to clean things.
Yeah, of
And
course.
so by being like elbows, knees, and toes, and all the different body parts, and calling them their correct name, and not being like
Yeah.
really uncomfortable about it,
Private parts or something.
gives children. And so if they're elbowing their neighbor, you're like, that's your elbow. Well, I wasn't in
Yeah.
control of it. I didn't mean it, but I thought it was your arm. I mean, you wash it, it's attached to you. Yes, it is, right? It helps you help them to not be bullies, right?
Mm.
By being too aggressive physically, which girls and boys can do, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
my daughter
also,
my
nobody
daughter
can
and my
yank
son, yeah.
your arm,
Mm.
nobody can pull your arm, and that's okay. And then teaching kids about what feels happy and what feels sad and what we do with those sad feelings. And I think like in religious circles are really good at teaching children to follow the feelings of what we would call the Holy Ghost or the Spirit or God, right?
Yeah.
But there's the yin and the yang, right? And we
Mhm.
need to teach kids that when they feel that, to go no. And not having children just hug someone for gratitude. Why do we have to give our bodies because they gave you a present?
Oh,
Because
yeah, that's fair.
pedophiles give compliments and presents to, it's a form of grooming. And
Yeah.
talking about what adults do with their bodies is a huge form of grooming to break down the child's, to desensitize them. The man that
Yeah.
chose to molest me, I've noticed I put it on him and not calling him my abuser. He would
Mhm.
talk about breasts and touching breasts. And that was a very big topic of conversation with him. So by the time he was touching my breasts, well, it wasn't a big
Mm.
thing. And so when we're talking about sex with children, we are opening the door for them to touch each other, other kids, playing
Mhm.
doctor. But when it's between kids, there's a certain form of innocence unless this child has been exposed to more adult actions. But kids will
Yeah.
just touch each other and be like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
well,
okay,
under
yeah,
8
that does
yeah,
this and
under
that
8,
does
there's a
that."
lot of, like, just exploration in general, right?
Innocence. And if you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god, you touched the penis," they're gonna
Yeah,
be
yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Whoa, that got a reaction out of adults." And kids like reactions,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
that's true,
just
yeah.
being like, "Oh yeah, things that underneath our underwear are private. And notice that I have this underwear, sweetie. One day your body's gonna change, and so we just start having this area be private too." And
Yeah.
those are things you'll notice you haven't seen the neighbors, and hopefully you live in a neighborhood where the neighbor's not flashing. He's
But
keeping that
yes, I
private.
get it, yes, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and so
yeah,
there's
showing
open
people
parts of
like,
our
yes, we
body,
all keep it, yeah.
and there's private parts of our body, and nobody should
Mm,
touch those private parts of your body without your permission.
mhm. Yeah, okay, I like that. And then as far okay, so under 8, you talk about body autonomy, and you talk about, you know,
Body responsibility.
responsibility.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So then you get to 8, 9, 10, whatever. Now you're
And
having
if you're
real
lucky,
conversations.
your kid will not come to you with questions before the age of 8 or 9. But in today's world, they'll come to you. For example, my son came to me one day and he said, "Mom, so and so told me," another little kid that was a year or so older, that that you need to touch your penis until it becomes like a stick, mom. And then you put it in a girl, and even if she says no, she likes it.
Whoa, are you kidding me?
Hmm.
Holy
He was
shit.
almost 8.
Oh no.
And so what I share from there is what the story and how I approach that with
Oh
kids is
my
how the whole
gosh.
entire thing, and that would probably take all the time we have. So they can attend
That's
one of my
insane.
workshops, but
That's
You're
terrifying, isn't it? As like a few, like a, I'm my daughter, I have my son and my daughter. My daughter's 5. That would terrify me.
Yes, and
I
you
don't know.
can
I
just
don't know
have
what
me
I
on
would.
again, and we can break all of that down for people, but I know we have
Sure.
lots of topics to cover. I'm not trying to
No,
be
go
like,
ahead. No, no, no,
I'm
no,
not
no.
gonna
This
give
is
you the thing, you
sure,
know?
sure, sure.
But
Yeah,
it
yeah,
takes
yeah.
at least 15 minutes, but, that and then I studied against psychology. I'd read a lot because of my own history of overcoming being molested from 2.5 to 14.
Okay.
So there was a certain amount of surprise and shock and anger that this was now my kid, because I term that as my kid was violated by a
Yeah,
peer,
yeah.
a kid
Absolutely.
who obviously that kid had gotten some really unhealthy things probably going down on them, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So how I handled that, I've been able to share it with lots of other people, and we don't need to make this a scary thing any more than if I talked about my elbow. See how my elbow's a little hairy and I don't like that? I mean, you laugh, but we need to make it that easy for kids without exposing them to adult concepts that their brains are not ready to
Sure.
handle the nuances of how to work with that in a safe way.
Okay. So if something like that happens, pro tip here, what I mean, what's the best practice?
First of all, stay calm.
Okay.
Stay very calm and just be like, don't, like, find out what they have been told. And then, of course, pro tip, answer the questions.
Okay.
If they're like,
Oh,
my
I
son
heard
figured
this. Is
out,
this true? Yeah.
figure out what
Okay.
they have been told and then answer the question honestly in a non-sensational way. And how I talk to the kids, just kind of giving a summation. I hate to like give the principle and not have it be filled out. But
Sure.
basically, if there is a tree that is alive, right?
Mhm, mhm.
This tree has all its branches and foliage. What is that tree good for? And you can have this big, long conversation with kids. I'm working on a children's book with this. And then you
Okay.
have the dead tree. It does not give back osmosis. You wouldn't want to build a tree house in it, right?
Yeah.
Now, both of the things that make people and human life is called sex. And
Mhm.
the thing that my son heard about is rape, which is a form of sex. But you can't build a tree house in that.
Mhm.
You can't build a life around that. So taking these principles down to things that kids can understand, and as in Tori Tinboom in the book Hiding Place, which if you guys have not read it, highly recommend this book. Her
Okay.
father's a watchmaker, and she asked some big girl questions, right? And he asked her to lift his bag of watchmaking things, and she couldn't. And then he easily lifts it. And he says, "You need to let me carry that for you right now." So there's a
Mm.
certain amount of giving the information in a non-sensational and calm way, and certain
Mhm.
information saying, "I'm going to carry that for you." And that goes back to what kind of love are you putting into a child, because you cannot have love without trust, and you can't have trust without love.
Mhm.
And so if you're
Yeah,
creating that
absolutely, yeah.
relationship with your child, they will let you hold that for them. So when it came
Yeah.
to telling my kid that people violate other people and rape them, and oh, by the way, that happened to me, was not
Yeah.
what happened that day. I just
Okay.
explained that there's a healthy form of everything in life and an unhealthy form of everything in life. And
Yeah.
what you heard about, you're going to have to let me hold that for you. Do you have any questions? Does that make sense? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
again, a big concept that I just shrunk down, but giving that principle, I've had all of it checked out by therapists and psychologists, and it's just a very easy way to talk to our kids, but it just takes a little bit more time to fill it out. So I guess
Yeah,
I
well,
just invited
there's
myself back on your podcast.
well, let's do it. I'm not mad about it. No, I think well, and I like that you said that because there is definitely um I like that because there's definitely some things that you got to wait for. You know what I mean? You just wouldn't understand it right
Mhm,
now. And by the
mhm.
way, hardest thing I've had to accept in my life is like I'm not ready for like, you ever try to look for an answer and the answer is you're not ready yet? Like what's that movie? I don't know that movie. You
Yeah,
can't
and
handle the
teenagers,
truth
they're adults in their brains,
in their brain. Yeah, I
right?
remember.
And
I
but their
remember.
brains are
Yeah.
also misfiring the neural pathways.
Yeah.
So it's, talking to your kids about this and talking to your teenagers, what I recommend is setting it up so that when they become a teenager, you've already set it up with the different quadrants. There's the social, There's the
Mhm.
mental, the psychological, there's the physical, and then the spiritual. Because in my home, that's important. So if the spiritual is not important in your home, then don't start preaching it because that's just weird, right?
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
are the social ramifications of something? What are the mental ramifications? What are the physical ramifications? So when it
Yeah.
came to immunizing my son against the uh, it's a thing that boys can carry that if they have sex with a girl, it can give her uterine cancer. And I can't remember what that's called. I did not immunize my son against that. And I said, basically, if you have sex, you could make her sick and not even realize you are. Could you
Mm.
even think that you would have that kind of intimate behavior with a young lady and think that you love her when you could be making her sick? Because I was not going to immunize my son against bad behavior.
Oh, yeah.
My daughter could be raped by a boy,
Yeah.
and that could cause a problem for her. So I did give her that vaccination,
Mhm.
but I wasn't giving
Yeah.
my son an open door because he wasn't physically able to provide for a child. So why engage in the behavior? Are you mentally able to get
Mm.
up at 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, um, you know, completely rewrite your life around that? So why engage
Yeah.
in a
That's a
behavior
tough
you're
one.
not ready for the consequence? And this goes back to how in society we are trying to circumvent consequences that existed since before any of us have ever even been a twinkle in our parents' eye. There
Mhm.
are consequences in life. If I eat all chocolate and cake all day, I am going to have an unhealthy body.
Yeah.
And that should not be celebrated because my body is not happy. That is going to
Yeah.
affect
I
my
agree.
chemistry of my brain, the pumping of my blood, right? I have to do a certain amount of physical exercise, period. And
Yeah.
even if I go and surgically get all that fat removed, I still have a fatty heart and a fatty liver.
Well, yeah, and what's funny about that is like we have like created these shortcuts. Um, but in my experience, and I'm sure you can say the same things, but in my experience, like goals aren't there for the results, right? Their goals are meant to create habits
That's
that
a
create the
great way to say it, Dalton.
you know what I'm saying?
Great way.
Because like
Yeah.
because like
Creating
yeah, hey, look.
character. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and you create habits that make you ready for the person who's ready to have the results they want, right? Because like, I read this amazing quote and I think it's just some harsh truths that we got to put out on the table, but like if you gave a poor person $1 million, they wouldn't be wealthy or rich. They would just be less poor a little longer. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like
Because
because because
money
yeah,
there's a principle of how you manage money that, for lack
yeah.
of a better term, is spiritual,
Yeah, well, and
right?
and like yeah, and like well, so I have mixed feelings about Dave Ramsey. I think he's awesome. I also don't like some of the things he says, but one of the things he says is he's like, you won't start saving money when you get that great job or when your kids move out or anything like that. He's like, it won't happen. You got to it'll only happen when you make it a priority, and that is kind of the principle of this. Like if you gave a poor person $1 million because and look, by the way, let me just stop real quick. I grew up in the poorest county in Iowa. Like 95% of our kids were on free lunches, food stamps. Like I was blessed in my life to have hardworking parents, and so we might have had that a little bit, but we lived a pretty good life. But like the house that I grew up in Iowa today is a 5 bedroom, 3 bathroom house, like 2,500 square feet, and it's worth 60 grand. Like you could buy it right now for 60K. Like
Yeah.
I
Well, I
grew up in
grew
a
up as
poor
a charter
neighborhood.
school.
Yeah.
So the
You
only
know what I
meal
mean?
I could count on was school lunch. So I get you,
Yeah.
and God
So
bless
I'm
America that you and I are sitting where we're sitting.
right, right. And so I'm empathetic and I want people to succeed. And I know that it's really hard in those neighborhoods to like come out. But I also know that there is some level of responsibility that you got to be like, look, like I had to get out of there. Like I woke up when I was 18 and they're like, what are you going to do? And I was like, not coming back here, oh, man, because if I stay here, it's not going to be good. And for some people who stayed there, it was great. You know what I mean? It's just everybody's got to figure out their
Well,
own
it's
path. But
in order like money and all the kind of things we're talking about, I think the word we could chew on is being proactive.
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
if
yeah.
you're not making a plan for your money or a plan for your life or a plan for how
Yeah.
you're raising kids, you're probably not going to be awesome at it. And
Right,
the
right.
reason that people, when they get a bunch of money and they don't have a plan for that money, that
Yeah, they
money just
blow it.
flows through their fingers,
Right.
right? Because
Well, and
energetically, they haven't made that plan.
to prove my point, I read a statistic on lottery winners. Do you know how many lottery winners there are who are still millionaires? It's close to zero.
Yeah.
It's like extremely close to zero. And which, I mean, it's just, that's a fact. That's
Yeah.
science.
Yeah, I've heard
That's
that too. I've seen that too. Yeah.
it's like there's not very many lottery winners who kept the money. And it's just so like obviously empathetic towards that. Obviously I want to do a lot of things when I'm able to like help people in that community. But at the same time, it also is like, look, you haven't created the habits in your life that will help you not only attain your goal but retain the goal. Because like
Right.
what I heard one of my mentors in life was like, it's easy to get to number one, it's harder to stay at number one.
Amen.
And
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like
Well,
real
it
easy to be a champion,
most of
harder to
us are
stay a
not
champion.
trying to be number one. We're just trying to define what success is. And I'm sure
Yeah,
you've heard
okay,
the
that's
saying
fair.
that if
Yeah,
you're
that's fair.
successful in one area, you tend to be successful in a lot of areas. And
Yeah,
it goes back to those habits that you have. Just
yeah,
like I feed my business daily, I feed my relationships daily. I
of
feed my
course.
soul daily. I feed
Yeah,
my
of course.
body daily, right? And if you understand that principle of being proactive and moving your life forward, with that plan, with that daily habits, then you're much more likely to achieve success in all the ways.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, I like that. I like that we've kind of talked about everything because it's great. So, but I do want to talk about this because it's something that people like our generation is trying to figure out, coming from a generation that really suppressed it, and that is like the how do you talk to your kids when it's appropriate. So we've kind of moved right. So under 8, body autonomy, body
Mhm.
responsibility. Okay, great. Um, Above that, you're teaching. So at what point do you get to
So
the
I'm doing
yeah?
the different quadrants.
Okay,
So as
yep,
soon
yep.
as my kid's
But
pushing
then
back and saying, "Why can't I?"
okay,
Well,
yeah, okay.
don't force them.
So what age is that, and what do you, so like how do you have like when it's time to actually like that's the age I want to know. Like when it's time to actually like, all right, this is exactly what we need to talk about. There's not going to be any secrets here. Like we're not
Oh,
throwing any
yeah, okay,
like
so
holding any
that's
punches.
2 different questions.
Okay, all right.
So
Okay.
I
Okay.
joke that 5 is when they start being like, "Why?" I mean, not
Yeah.
the why this, why, like the 2-year-old why, but they're
Yeah,
like,
but like they're
"I've seen you be
genuinely
an idiot. Why do you have the answers?" That can be
right.
5, that can be 12, depending on
Yeah, sure.
your kid's personality. And I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
that's where you're willing to, lean into that conversation. If your kid challenges you, the answer is not because I said so, I'm the parent and you don't pay bills, right? It's when they start asking why, be like, have a discussion, really open up about, well, okay, are you ready to drive a car, buddy?
Yeah.
Can you even
Yeah.
reach the gas pedals? There's a reason they haven't made cars like that. When my kids were little and they didn't understand why they couldn't run out into the road, I'd walk them up to a sitting car and show how they can't see the driver's face. And if they can't see
Mm,
the driver's face, the driver can't see them.
yeah.
And so if it's fair or not, I've got the height here. So that gives
Hmm.
me a perspective in which to do this. So, when it comes to why can't I buy this thing? Okay, let me explain what a household budget is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
What,
Just
money. Yeah.
really explaining how these things, whatever it is that they're pushing back on, don't be the authoritarian because then you're going to create more rebellion.
Yeah.
Take the time and you can say, that is an awesome question. It's going to take a little bit of time to answer that. Let's set up when we're going to talk about it. You
Yeah.
know? And the older
Great point.
kids get, the more you got to sometimes schedule those things, right? But one day there was a young lady that I found out what her father was doing to her. He was molesting her. And so I kidnapped the children. And so
Mm,
my children were hearing me turn myself into the police as having kidnapped these kids and that I was not giving them back at the request of the father. And this is why I was doing it. And I was calling all but the National Guard, to get the legal on my side as much as I could
mhm.
because of what was happening to the children. And
Yeah.
my son was like watching this, and he was probably about 12 at the time. And
Mhm.
he goes, Mom, what? Whoa, because all this is happening. All of a sudden, there's all this activity at our house. I mean, the police came over and all this kind of stuff, right?
No, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there was a scene, yeah.
I mean,
In a good way,
I
yeah, in a
gotta
good
keep
way,
the
yeah.
kids, by the way, you know?
Oh, good, yeah,
They
good.
did not have to go back to their dad. That is one accusation that has to be proven innocent. You're
Yeah,
guilty until you prove yourself innocent, and I think that's on that one, that's fair, which is why false accusers should go to jail for that. But anyway, my son's like, "Mom, how do you know what to do?" And I was like,
mhm.
"Oh." I said, "That is an awesome question, son, and I'm going to answer that tomorrow." Because there was too much happening right then to just throw in
Yeah,
my
you
kid's
can't.
lap because I was molested longer than you've been alive.
Mm,
That is
dang.
something that was too heavy that I need to kind of carry that. So I had to make sure that I set the conversation up in a way that we could have a successful outcome that he wouldn't be like, "What?" Right?
Mhm.
So there's this balance. I do think that there are private things that it's a really hard thing to say, but there are secrets in life.
Sure.
I don't have
Yeah,
sex in front of my children. That is private,
sure. Yeah,
right? And so what positions their father and I take are no one's business. That's a secret, right?
sure.
But when you look at what we depict in Hollywood, everything's open. And so I would point out
Yeah,
to my
yeah,
kids that there are secrets that people have that are between those two people, and
yeah.
that's appropriate. But if anyone's ever trying to have you keep a secret from your dad and I, that is a really dangerous thing because
Yeah,
we
that's a
have
bad yeah,
responsibility to keep you
yeah.
safe. So really explaining what are good secrets, right? But,
Right,
"Oh,
right.
your dad just lost his job and we only have this much savings." That's not a kid's business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's yeah, yeah, yeah. I get
Do you
that.
see what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
everything being open, it needs to be guided a certain amount by what the kid's being exposed to and what questions they have, and that
well, yeah,
you're the
and
person that will answer the questions, but there's a line of propriety, which is a
yeah,
bad word
yeah.
to use nowadays, and a line of you're the responsible parent. I grew up in a home where my bank account, if I had money in my bank account, my parents would take it out to pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
And the responsibility to run the household was placed on me. That was too young.
Mhm.
That
Absolutely.
was
Yeah.
too much pressure on me. I missed a lot of my childhood because I was worried about being able to pay the mortgage.
Mhm.
And maybe my
Yeah, yeah,
parents should
yeah.
have sold a
Yeah.
house and moved us into a trailer. That would have been easier on me than trying to maintain a certain level
Yeah,
of.
isn't that yeah, isn't that the but again, like, one of the reasons, as a dad hearing that, there's a lot of, like, weight to that, but I think it would be easier because, like, men have I don't know, men just in general, I'm Polynesian, I know I don't look like it all the way, but,
You don't
um
look totally white, so good for you,
right,
you
there
know?
you go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but it's funny because, like, I grew up in the Polynesian household, but men just in general, we have these things that, are off limits to talk about unless you have really good friends, unless you're in kind of these circles where it's okay to talk about, like, your struggles and stuff like that. That's one of the reasons because I feel like a lot of problems could be avoided if men just learned how to, like, not lean so much into the ego. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
it's
having
okay that yeah.
having those conversations, and there
Yeah,
are
as a
conversations that are effectively had with my daughter that I
yeah,
don't have the right personality for or the right masculine and energy for, right? That
yeah,
she needs to hear from her dad or she needs to hear from
sure.
a trusted uncle,
Yeah,
right?
and yeah, and vice versa.
And vice
Like,
versa, you
with
know?
my daughter, there sometimes my wife goes, "You gotta handle this with the kid," or with my daughter, and same with my son. I'm like, "Hey, you gotta talk to him about this, right?" But it's like this team thing, and again, like, it's just funny because I don't understand what happened. Like, that's what a team does. Like, we take you know what I mean? We play our position, we stay in our lane. Of course, we come help out. Of course, some of the best players on the team can do different things, but for the most part, You play your position. You know what I mean?
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with
And
that. Like, what's the big deal?
it's really hard if you're having to be a team all by yourself, single parents out there, both single moms and
That's
single dads. And that's why as a
yeah.
community, we need to lean in and help those,
And help people. Yeah, absolutely.
and I'm not talking about giving them more money. I'm talking about, picking the kid up from school and actual mentoring and loving on that family.
Giving,
Giving gifts of time. I lived in the inner city of DC, and it was very interesting to me, being one of, maybe 5 white people that I was going to church with, that as people in this community would discover principles of self-reliance and, that they had the ability to change their life, generational slum living people would go to college. You can throw all the money you want at kids to go to college that live in the inner city, but if that kid does not believe that they are college material, that check will go uncashed.
Yeah.
And so problems are solved in our own individual hearts and how we think. And that is through conversation and relating experiences. We call that mentorship, right? What you're doing on this podcast, you don't know who could be plugging into this because it's free. I mean, what a beautiful world of information we live in. It could change someone's life.
Kidding.
Conversely, the day my book, Love Me Too, came out on preventing and how to recover from sexual abuse, and I'm looking in my category, there was a book teaching people how to be more effective pedophiles.
Those books are real?
Yeah, and it's out there. And all the good information and all the bad information, where it used to be that we as parents could control the flow of conversation, right?
Sure.
We had the remote to the TV. The internet didn't exist. But don't assume that your kid doesn't know a heck of a lot more than they think they do. And if you've not set the groundwork to be able to have these conversations with them, you're undermining their confidence and their ability to go into the world confidently.
Yeah.
Because there's all that shame covering it. And there should be no shame in having a conversation of any nature with your parent.
Yeah.
And if your kid comes and says, I've masturbated or I've had sex. Okay, well, let's, we've taught you not to do that. It's not really helpful.
Yeah.
Because clearly maybe if you're a religious family, you've set your standards down. Be calm.
Sure.
Talk to them.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
My son brought me the phone one day and this girl was offering him a blowjob.
Jeez.
And talk about ego. I'm the lady who teaches kids not to do that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Probably in
right?
school.
I mean, you talked about there's feminine ego too, right? Ego, period. We all are guilty of it.
Right.
And I'm like, okay. Looking through his phone, being all calm, seeing if he had been propositioning her. Instead of just being like, well, that hussy, right? Let's find out what my son's responsibility is in this conversation. And, before I'm discussing with him what to do about it, I'm like, were you laughing at conversations about blowjobs? Were you having conversations about blowjobs? Were you asking for blowjobs? And he laughed at some of those conversations. So I'm like, you need to be more clear about what you stand for, because people only make offers they think will be accepted to other adults or to teenagers. Right?
Oh, good point. Yeah.
So there's a responsibility on my son to make sure he's clear about what he is or is not going to accept. And then we can address with the young lady that we are not accepting this offer.
I'm sorry.
And
That's
the conversation
it's great.
Mother,
it's great. It's just fun. It's just,
yeah. The conversation I had with her mother, she was like, well, what can you do?
Oh, well, a lot.
And I was like, what can you do? Let me tell you what we're going to do in my household, and I walked her through that. And, we have to be able to be parents, and that means being tough sometimes, but we also can't be so tough that we haven't built the trust, which again, trust and love are intertwined, and confidence, if it's for family trust, family confidence. Internal confidence is if you trust you. Like, for example, I can't be a confident person and not admire my character. There's no shortcut to that. You can't self-love your way in to liking someone you don't respect.
Yeah.
So if you want
Yeah.
your kids to respect you, you got to put the time in to let them know they're loved and they're valued and they're precious to you. If you want them to, hold your standards, you've got to put that in so they have confidence in that relationship. And that takes
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned is like just staying calm, right? Because that would be insane. I don't know. Whew.
Yeah,
I just remember having conversations like, oh geez, dude.
my son's done some modeling. He's a little bit too cute. It's a little bit of a challenge. So,
Oh goodness. That's great.
yeah,
Well, I mean, no, a lot of good information there though, because I think that's what we miss, like just staying calm. I think that's probably the biggest thing because and then not just like there's yeah, I like that. I get that. I
stay
like that
calm, get your ego, which you already
and then
said, get all that's
yeah,
all goes with being calm.
and I like that you
Find
said
out
answer
what
the
they're
question.
thinking, how they're
Yeah,
thinking it, 20, 30, 40 minutes into it, you can say, I would prefer we take this course of action. But you've got to
yeah,
figure out where they're at first because
yeah,
they have
yeah,
been chances are if you were in a religious household and your kid has put something about that in their bio or their Instagram, they are being
sure.
targeted by pedophiles.
Yeah,
Pedophilia
that's true.
went
Yeah.
up during COVID because all the kids are home, of course, only studying the things on the internet. And if they can get that kid to have enough shame
Yeah.
because they have sent a naughty picture,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if kids
you're like,
should
"Oh,
well
Leta, well, yeah,
I go, "Dude, I don't even think you should have that. It's banana." I don't know, but it's such a
check your
hard it's
kids'
such a
electronic
mix.
devices, but
Yeah, it's such a mm,
assume that they are being targeted because they probably are.
yeah, yeah, whether you know it or not. That's the scary part too.
There's
I don't
more
know,
sex
but then you just like,
trafficking. Yeah,
oh yeah, I mean one of my she's been Candace I think her last name is Laird. Um I can't remember, but her first name is Candace. She runs a nonprofit, anti-human trafficking nonprofit, Exodus. I've had her on the podcast a few times. Attended that gala once, and that's a heavy gala to attend.
and
Everybody's
sex
looking nice, and
trafficking is a fancy word for slavery,
yeah, yeah,
as is their work trafficking, that they human trafficking, they do it for work,
sure,
right?
right.
There's more people in slavery today than have ever existed, and we're arguing over feminine power?
Good point.
It's like a huge distraction. It's like, "Ladies, we've achieved it. Now let's go reach and help the other ones because
And
girls are
help
more
people
likely to be targeted."
than boys
Venezuela
are. Yeah,
being a socialist country, these girls are so desperate for food that they are just the sex trafficking is just swarmed with Venezuelan girls who thought
mm,
they were gonna go be maids in Brazil.
wow, I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
insane.
it's
Well, I just read an article.
heartbreaking stuff.
I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal that Nigeria shut down all their schools because people were like groups of people were coming in and taking the students like right out of class in broad daylight at gunpoint. And so like I believe that was the article. I'll have to go back and double
Mhm.
check,
I've
but
heard stuff like that, and
yeah, that's
those children
bananas.
are loved by their parents just like we love our kids.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that we're not living naively and not being uncomfortable because the world is totally comfortable having all of these conversations. They're comfortable showing, sex. I mean,
Yeah.
when somebody gets, caught for having child pornography, who's making that child pornography? That's somebody's kid,
Right.
right? That's being
Right.
depicted in
Right.
that. All of this is completely comfortable in our society to talk about the enjoyment of it all, right?
Yeah.
We need to be very
Wow.
comfortable arming our children with the information that they can be safe and that they can say, "No, don't touch me. No, I'm
Mhm.
not comfortable with this conversation. I'm not talking." I think it's really important that we say truth should never be sacrificed to kindness.
Mhm.
I mentioned earlier
Yeah,
how
yeah,
we
yeah.
teach our
I
kids,
like
"Oh,
that.
give your uncle a hug for bringing you a present. Give him a high five or a hug, whatever you want. Say thank
Yeah,
you."
whatever you or don't.
Yeah. But, you
Or
need to be
whatever.
appropriate, you can't be like, "Whatever," right? Because that's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
not
yeah,
being,
obviously, yes. Be
polite.
grateful.
But
Show gratitude,
words,
but you don't
high
have to
five,
yeah.
whatever you want.
Mhm.
You know, if you want to give them a
Yeah, yeah,
hug, but
whatever you
people say you want to give them a hug. I'm like, or a high five, son, whatever.
or yeah, I like that.
You know,
That's
you got a
well,
choice.
yeah. And yeah, and but it's also nice that, in that little even that little bit, we're just teaching people, right?
Yeah.
Like it's,
And they'll
you
be
don't
like,
have to give a
oh,
hug.
some people are like, why can't they hug me? And I'm like, well, I think it's a little weird that you're demanding a hug.
Yeah.
And, if there are people, since my books come out, I'm able to be like,
Ah.
the book I wrote, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm teaching my kids, but if you haven't written a book on the topic, you can just be like, we
Uh,
believe in body autonomy and body choice.
yeah, yeah, of course. I
Yeah,
think,
that's
yeah,
what
of
we
course.
believe in our
Yes or no.
house.
Yeah,
Yeah. My kids
that's
don't
funny.
have to hug me to apologize.
Sure,
They just need to
sure.
have an appropriate tone and give me eye contact, because that's called
There
living
you
in the
go.
same house and being respectful.
Right, yeah, 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 and just being a
And
yeah,
I
because
apologize in turn
being a
to
good
them when
human
needed.
being.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
being a good human being, because you wanna teach your kids, like, being a productive human being in society, because you're not gonna get very far if you're a douche.
Right. Yeah,
But there is boundaries. Like, you can be kind
exactly.
and not, lean into certain societal things. I really enjoyed our conversation, and yes, Lita, we will have to do this again, for sure,
Perfect.
because I
Yeah, you're
appreciate it.
like, I'm like, "I told you, I'm good
The
on my feet,
the
I'm ready to go," and I'm
no,
just like,
the
"Content,
hour
let's do it."
yeah, the hour flew by. It was fantastic. So before we leave though, where can everybody find your books? What are they called? What's the website? Let everybody know.
So if you know how to spell my name, which it's all on this, so
Yep,
just
yep.
letagreene.com is my website where you can find my books. You sign up for my newsletter, my social media. I talk about God and family a ton, and sometimes my cats. Is Leta
Great.
Greene, and Leta Greene, aka Hotness, is where you can find my podcast and more of my professional side. Not as much cat pictures and very little about my kids. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn. I don't tweet. And I have
Okay, fair
YouTube. But
enough.
if you buy my book from my website, I sign it. But it's also at Barnes and Noble and Amazon. Both my books, Love Me Too and How to Embrace Your Hotness.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Lita. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on, Dalton. I love being able to have these important conversations.
Of course. Thank you.